Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Books and Bytes. Today we're delving into the groundbreaking work of Deirdre McCloskey's Bourgeois Equality, how ideas, not capital or institutions, caused the modern world. Now, we're embarking on a deep dive into an argument that's, well, it's pretty sweeping. It fundamentally challenges nearly everything we thought we knew about how the modern world, with all its unprecedented wealth, actually came to be. So instead of pointing to the usual suspects like mountains of capital or really well-structured political institutions, McCloskey suggests that something far more intangible, a revolutionary shift in ideas, was the real engine behind what she calls the Great Enrichment. You're going to discover how this radical change in how we thought about ourselves and, crucially, how society viewed ordinary people and their commercial pursuits quite literally bent the curve of human history. You can picture it, right? A graph of global income per person just flat for millennia, and then, boom, around 1800, it shoots almost straight up, like a hockey stick. That astonishing leap, she argues, that's the mystery we're really here to solve today.
That's exactly right. For centuries, humanity was basically caught in what felt like this relentless zero-sum game. Life, for most people, was just a brutal struggle. You're talking about existing on what, by our standards, is a tiny amount, maybe $3 a day, often plagued by sickness, dying young. So what economists often call the Malthusian trap, where any gains are just swallowed up by population growth, keeping everyone pretty much stuck. But then, after 1800, something utterly unprecedented happened. The book meticulously argues that the dramatic uplift we've seen since then, an increase in real income per person by orders of magnitude, like a staggering 1,000 to 10,000%, it just cannot be explained by the usual factors. Business as usual doesn't cut it. What we're really talking about here is a profound, almost you could say, a spiritual, cultural, and ethical transformation.
Okay, so if it wasn't just capital piling up, and it wasn't simply better laws or institutions on their own, let's really unpack this revolutionary idea. Because most of us, we probably grew up learning that capitalism was the big game changer, the engine of progress. But McCloskey, she comes along and says, hold on a minute, not so fast. She thinks we've been looking in the wrong place.
Indeed. She asserts that capitalism, well, at least in the traditional sense of just accumulating wealth or investing, that's ancient. It's always been around. Capital accumulation, you saw it in 17th century Japan, ancient Rome, medieval Europe. It's everywhere, historically speaking. The real seismic shift, according to her, was something much subtler, egalitarian liberalism. And this wasn't just about economic freedom, though that was part of it. It was a truly radical concept for its time. It started finding its feet, kind of fragilely, around 1776 in places like the Netherlands, Switzerland, Britain. And what was so revolutionary? It fostered liberty in law and dignity in esteem. So it wasn't just about laws protecting property, which helps, obviously. It was a fundamental change in how society valued its ordinary members, the inventor, the shopkeeper, the merchant. They started to be seen as, well, honorable, not just, necessary cogs.
Right, and this is where it gets really fascinating for me. This new equality, even if it started off partial and uneven, it encouraged something really basic, something human. The urge to have a go. It wasn't just permission, it felt like encouragement for common people to try things, to experiment, innovate.
And to fail, importantly.
Exactly, to fail without total shame and then try again. And this, she argues, this unleashed a genuine idea explosion. Think about the sheer volume of inventions and improvements after 1800. Okay, some were mundane, like better textile looms, but some were dramatic, like nitroglycerin or dynamite.
Right, things that symbolized a whole new level of manipulating the material world.
And it marked this profound shift away from just competing for what she calls positional goods.
Things like status, yeah. Like being top at Harvard. Valuable because they're scarce.
Right. Instead of seeing competition as inherently unfair or zero-sum, this new mindset started to recognize that competition in the marketplace could actually rouse and keep in continual motion the industry of mankind. And that could create widespread benefits for everyone, not just the elite few.
And the impact, when you look at it that way, utterly profound. She uses these great relatable examples. Think of Hans Rosling's washing line idea. For centuries, women spent just hours and hours scrubbing clothes. An income of just $80 a day, which became achievable through this great enrichment, buys an electric washing machine. Think of the liberation of time and effort.
It's transformative on a daily level.
Absolutely. Or look at China. The aspirations shifted so fast. In the 50s, maybe a watch, a bicycle, luxury by the 90s, color TVs, then cars, houses. It's not just about more stuff. It's about dignity, aspiration, what's possible in a human life. And look at Sweden, now 30 times richer than in 1800. It's a testament, she argues, to how a society that genuinely values these bourgeois virtues Honesty, prudence, hard work, not just inheritance or birthright.
Right, not just who your parents were.
Exactly. That kind of society can achieve incredible betterment for pretty much everyone.
So what McCloskey does so well here is she just cuts through the standard explanations, from both the left and the right. She argues the Great Enrichment did not happen because of the routine things we always see in history, like union demands, government regulation, or even just standard investments in factories or roads.
Yeah, those things were always there to some extent.
Exactly. This isn't about slow, incremental gains adding up. This is orders of magnitude, a radical explosion of prosperity. It's different.
Precisely. And that's why she urges us to maybe even drop the word capitalism. Because in her view, it misleads us. It makes us focus on the brick-on-brick accumulation, just having more stuff, more money. That's always happened. She prefers terms like trade-tested betterment or innovism. Why? Because they highlight the frenetic bettering of machines, of procedures that really took off after 1800.
Driven by that ethical shift we talked about.
Exactly. Supported by that startling ethical reevaluation. And she directly confronts the, let's say, conventional left view that poverty is overcome by overthrowing capitalism.
Oh.
She shows, pretty convincingly I think, how technological advances, even scary things like robots, actually tend to raise real wages over time. Think about it simply. A better tool helps Rosie the Riveter produce more, right? So she can earn more. And eventually people move to new, higher value jobs.
Right.
And the idea that, socialist expropriation or just charity can match the kind of growth you get from trade-tested innovation, well, she points to places like India and China today. Where is the rapid growth happening? It's happening precisely where innovation is encouraged, and yes, where profits are allowed to be earned.
But she's just as critical of the standard right-wing emphasis on institutions alone, isn't she? The idea that you just need to, parachute in property rights or a legal system, and boom, prosperity follows.
Oh, absolutely. That's a really crucial point, and it's quite challenging to some standard economic thinking. Sure, laws against murder, basic contract enforcement, they're necessary, obviously. But McCloskey argues that many key institutions, like really robust property rights, they often emerge before a strong, centralized state could perfectly enforce them. She suggests it was ethics, shared values, trust. That's what really held societies together and allowed them to function and eventually prosper, not just the formal laws.
Those institutions are like...
frosting on the cake if they lack ethical backing. That's her phrase.
I like that.
Think about everyday professionalism. The bus driver responsible for dozens of lives, the politician resisting a bribe when nobody's looking. Is that just about incentives? Or is it about deeply held values? A sense of duty, of what's right?
Yeah, it goes deeper.
She critiques that standard economic model, the Max U framework, maximizing utility, for often missing this whole moral dimension. Or assuming ethics only kicks in under extreme pressure. It leads her to ask that classic question, quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who guards the guardians? Who enforces the enforcers?
If not the underlying ethics of the people themselves.
Exactly. And she points to, the real world struggles with corruption in places like Italy or India as examples that support her anti-neo-institutional view. It emphasizes that you need the creation of a new culture, a shift in what people believe is honorable, more than just changing the structures on paper.
Okay, so putting this all together, what this radically different perspective really means for understanding how our world changed is... we have to look beyond just the material stuff. We need to dive deep into ideas, into rhetoric, into these cultural shifts, the stories we tell about ourselves, basically.
Exactly. And the book painstakingly tracks this really dramatic, though maybe slow-moving at first, shift in attitudes towards trade, towards numbers, towards betterment, towards the whole idea of the bourgeoisie.
The middle class, the business people.
Right. And this happens mainly between, say, 1600 and 1848 in northwestern Europe. She uses fantastic examples, like the changing meaning of the word honest.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that one.
Well, originally, from Latin honestus, it meant honorable, like having high rank. Think of a Renaissance gentleman's honor, Castiglione, Machiavelli. Molière's Bourgeois Gentilhomme plays on this. An honnête homme was a man of status. But by the 19th century, especially in English, the meaning totally flipped. It came to mean truth-telling, paying your debts.
Things that apply to ordinary merchants.
Exactly. Trollope's novels show this. Even a landlady could be honest in this new, respected way. It wasn't about rank anymore.
That is such a subtle but incredibly powerful shift, isn't it? It's like language itself adapted to elevate a whole new kind of person in society. It changed who was seen as admirable.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just single words. She points out how the whole perceived English national character seemed to transform. In the 17th century, they were often described, even by themselves, as bold, audacious, warlike, vainglorious, kind of swashbuckling. But by the 19th century, the dominant image, the ideal, shifted to virtues like honesty, prudence, patriotism, self-control, fair play, courage. Now, this wasn't some change in basic human psychology. That doesn't change much. This was a shift in society's sociology, what people said about each other, what they praised, what was, on their lips.
You see it reflected everywhere.
Yeah, from Samuel Johnson, who was a Tory but surprisingly suspicious of aristocrats and quite favorable to the bourgeoisie, to Jane Austen. Austen understood prudence not just as being careful with money, but as a vital virtue needing balance, especially in novels like Pride and Prejudice.
And Benjamin Franklin feels like the poster child for this new ethos, right?
He really is a prime example.
Yeah.
Franklin was never ashamed of being a printer, of being in trade. He actively used his business success as a launch pad for civic republicanism, for improving his community. He embodied a world that was starting to presume cooperation, mutual benefit, not just that cynical Hobbesian view of life as a war of all against all.
Right.
And you even see it on stage. Plays like The London Merchant in the 1730s. She says they were almost militant in their pride in the middle class. They openly said the merchant's name never degrades the gentleman, and even went further, claiming merchandising was a science that promoted humanity. That's a whole new story about business.
So this whole transformation wasn't just secular or economic or cultural. It seems like it had deep religious roots or undertones, too.
Oh, very much so. McCloskey highlights this profound shift happening around 1700 from what she calls an ethic of being, which focused mostly on your eternal soul, your place in the hierarchy, to an ethic of acting. Suddenly, everyday productive life, honest work, even making money through innovation and trade, gained this immense dignity and moral worth. It wasn't seen as inherently suspect anymore.
How did that happen?
Well, things like the Protestant priesthood of all believers, empowering ordinary people to read Scripture themselves, combined with the spread of grammar schools fostering literacy. It created this new boldness, a sense of liberty, a feeling that individuals could shape their own destiny, both spiritually and materially. It's fascinating, even that famous phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from 1776. It wasn't brand new. It was already a familiar formula among the sort of liberal thinkers within the clergy. It reflected this big societal move away from only focusing on heaven, towards seeking betterment and fulfillment here in this world through action.
It really does sound like a great convergence of ideas, doesn't it? Religious, cultural, economic thinking, all kind of pointing in this new direction.
Precisely. And McCloskey is careful here. She emphasizes this wasn't about Europeanness being uniquely special or superior. She points out how, for instance, post-1978 China, with its motto, "Getting rich became glorious," mirrored this earlier European shift in rhetoric and ethics in a striking way.
So the potential was elsewhere, too.
Absolutely. She argues other civilizations, Mayans, Chinese, Tokugawa Japan, had many of the ingredients for rapid betterment, just like early modern Europe did. They had markets, they had ingenuity. But for complex reasons, that crucial ethical and rhetorical shift, that widespread valuing of bourgeois innovation and dignity, it just didn't take hold in the same way or at the same time. Take medieval Italian merchants. They were often deeply religious, sure. They thought being unreliable in business was a sin against God, a very literal gospel of wealth. But even with that, their economic thinking was often still stuck in older zero-sum mentalities. It didn't spark that same kind of runaway, the explosion.
And all this circles back to the core point, really, that the Great Enrichment wasn't some slow, gradual buildup over centuries. It was surprisingly sudden, an explosion after 1800, a truly unique event.
Indeed. That distinction is critical. You have historians like Douglas North, Robert Thomas, arguing for sustained economic growth going back maybe 1,000 years. But McCloskey shows pretty convincingly that any growth back then was tiny, like 0.1, 0.2% a year, basically imperceptible over a lifetime.
Background noise almost.
Pretty much. The real acceleration, she calculates it around 5.87% per year, which is 60 times faster. That was undeniably a phenomenon of just the last 2 centuries. This unprecedented growth, the thing that's lifted billions out of grinding poverty, transformed daily life. That's why she argues so forcefully that it was the ideas that changed. Ideas about who deserves respect, how we talk about commerce and innovation, the value of liberty for ordinary people. That's the true, and she'd say, the most ethical explanation for our modern world. It boils down to warrantable beliefs, what we come to accept as true, and valuable through conversation, through rhetoric. That's what drives discovery and betterment.
So what we've really deep dived into today is this profound and maybe, yeah, counterintuitive idea that our collective beliefs, the stories we tell, how we talk about stuff, it genuinely shapes our economic and social reality, more than we often realize. McCloskey makes this compelling case that it's not just resources, not just laws on the books, but this intangible yet incredibly powerful force of shared values. The dignity we give to everyone who dares to innovate, to have a go.
And understanding that, I think, is just crucial for all of us, especially if the goal is genuinely to help the poor, to foster betterment, to keep improving human lives globally. It shifts the focus, doesn't it? Away from just slicing up the existing pie differently or just adding more rules, towards cultivating a culture that really prizes innovation, prizes open conversation, and prizes the freedom of ordinary people to create, to trade, to improve things.
It definitely leaves us with a provocative thought to chew on, doesn't it? You know, if a big shift in rhetoric and ideas could unleash that kind of explosion of prosperity in the past, what are our society's unspoken assumptions today about who's truly honorable, about what activities we really value the most? And how might those ideas, maybe quietly, without us even noticing, be either pushing us forward or maybe holding back the next wave of betterment for everyone? Something to ponder.